The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Ben the Magnanimous presiding. Will you all rise for the Honorable Judge Ben the Magnanimous? Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. They say justice is blind. As such, today we are hearing the case of The People versus Faces in the Dark. This 1960 British black and white psychological thriller tells the story of a wealthy industrialist who, after being struck blind by an experimental light bulb, takes a holiday to recuperate in the countryside and begins to suspect that those closest to him are trying to kill him in order to inherit his fortune. For those unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful. And the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Maynard, you are appearing on behalf of the prosecution. I don't see the point in delaying any further. You may begin with your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Distinguished members of the jury, this movie does not make any sense. It's silly. It's ridiculous. It's absurd, even. The first time I watched it, I had no idea where it was going, but admittedly, I was willing to go along for the ride. Now, if only I had known that ride would end with me getting kicked out of the car and stranded, confused and lost by the side of the road, unsure of how to ever get home, I wouldn't have gone along. Because once the whole plot was laid bare and all the film's cards were on the table, I realized this movie is based on one of the flimsiest premises I can recall seeing in a film in a long time. And when I watched it a second time, those glaring plot holes were truly undeniable. The incredibly shaky concept that holds this film together requires such an intense suspension of disbelief on behalf of the audience that the movie becomes something akin to a farce. This movie would be more at home within the catalog of Mystery Science Theater 3000. It's that ridiculous. What is this movie? Why is this movie? By all rights, this movie shouldn't even exist, but it does, and it's up to you, the jury, to put it in its rightful place. Thank you.
All right, and Larry Blamire, I didn't see that coming. You may proceed with your opening statement, sir.
Thank you, and I got to say, Rob, you're right. What am I talking about? This is a terrible movie. No, I'm kidding.
Twist. I was ready to adjourn the court.
I first of all apologize to the court that Rob saw a different movie. I don't know how that happened. The one that I saw, and I've watched it for a second time now, and it's still good, even though I knew it was coming. It is best to view this movie not knowing where it's going to go, because I think it has some nice twists and turns. It's a moderate budget movie, but I think that the director, whose name is David Eady, who had done documentaries, and he did not have a large output, but I think this adaptation of the novel, of the French novel that it's based on, is very effective in a mounting sense of paranoia that sort of looks forward to later films like Wait Until Dark and See No Evil with Mia Farrow, and a lot of the movies of the 1970s where paranoia was commonplace, and the excellent British TV series Thriller from the 70s with Brian Clements. It has that kind of claustrophobic feeling to it, where you follow this guy and you don't know where it's going, and you're never quite sure, is he insane, is he going crazy? That ambiguity is really beautifully used, and I think that I would not call it a perfect movie, but I think it's an extremely effective movie that keeps you on the edge of your seat. And the third act in particular, it's nicely structured so that the third act is really kind of ups the ante and makes it more what I'd call Hitchcockian, where the viewer is now let in on what's going on and identifies even more so with the hapless protagonist. It also has an ending which is pretty chilling, pretty chilling.
All right. Well, thank you. Let's proceed with the prosecution's exhibits. Mr. Maynard, you're up.
Thank you. The first thing I'd like to talk about is how Richard, the protagonist, the man who was struck blind by the experimental light bulb, never uses a cane after his accident to help himself get around. I mean, instead he chooses to just grope around blindly, feeling his way with his hands. I mean, wouldn't you think that would leave him incredibly prone to tripping and hurting himself?
What's your objection, sir?
Objection, Your Honor.
Yes.
That's based upon a cliche.
Mr.
I don't
Maynard,
know
do
if
you
it's a
think
cliche that blind people use canes. I think there's a reason they use canes. You can lightly tap on an object and know before you're going to trip to it. I mean,
I'm going to overrule that objection. I do see Mr. Maynard's point that if I were blind, I would like to have some sort of...
Could I have a clarification?
Yes,
Could
please.
I clarify?
Yes, please.
Clarify for a second. What I meant by that is that you expect that all sightless people are going to act in a certain way, which I find somewhat objectionable, Mr. Maynard, and I'm sure you didn't mean that personally. But the fact is that this fellow, Richard Hammond character, his character's based on I don't need nothing, I don't need help from nobody kind of thing, and so it makes perfect sense.
That would be true to the character. However, he is newly blind, so he isn't quite like accustomed to his surroundings.
On top of that, he seems to...
I'll leave the objection overruled, and Mr. Maynard, you can proceed.
And on top of that, he seems to feel his way around entirely based on what he says is memory. Now, I don't know if anyone else here has lived in the same house for many years, but how well do you think you could get around with your eyes shut? I'll tell you, I've had some experience with trying to get around my house in the dark when I go and turn off a light, and that's a room I've gotten across 1,000 times. And with a light off, I still hit my toe on something, stub my toe on something, trip and fall.
Toho DVDs or what was it?
A mountain of Toho DVDs, whatever might be out in the middle of the open. I keep my Toho DVDs on a shelf, sir.
Oh, yes. Apologies.
So I just think that it's preposterous that this is how he chooses to get around. Literally groping blindly against walls everywhere he goes, and supposedly based on this memory that he has of the layout of all his house, I think he would fall down and trip almost constantly.
And this film likes to get tight perspective on him being blind, so you don't see what else is around him. Like having a cane or something of that nature is just another thing that we could have tightly been focused on.
Absolutely. To me, it's just if it is obstinance on his part, then it would, in my opinion, cost him a lot of his mobility. There's several scenes in this movie where he straight out runs, right, and then almost trips over patio furniture. But
which scenes were those?
When he's escaping from the house, towards the end of the climax, he chooses to escape from the house. This is before he is nearly struck by a train and brought to a hospital. He runs out of the house. First, he climbs down a trellis, which is ridiculous that he understands how to hang off of a trellis by memory, that I assume he's never climbed down before. But after that, he then attempts to run across the backyard, again, nearly tripping over some furniture, some patio furniture there along the way. He also tries to run in that hospital. Admittedly, he does run into some tables there because he doesn't know how the hospital's laid out. But I mean, he shouldn't even be able to get down the stairs on that hospital. Not without a cane or something. He's going to hurt himself.
Okay, your point is taken.
So get a cane, Richard. That's my first point. Now,
defense, would you like to rebuttal that?
Yeah, I would. I know what you're saying, Rob. Nothing would be more exciting than 90 minutes of a guy banging around into stuff. We sure don't want to take your license there, because I know I want to see someone bumping into something for 85 minutes. I think that's totally absurd. This is a case of where you take license, and you have to take license to tell a story effectively. And really, if that's going to be your focus, if you're going to be like, oh, we should have bumped into that, well, then I don't think you're really letting yourself go down the stream of this movie, if I can use a metaphor. You flow down like a flowing, beautiful stream of paranoia.
I was flowing. I'd like to assure the court I was flowing.
Let it be noted that he was flowing.
You got to let yourself go, Rob. You're too analytical. You got to fall into the movie's wonderful, beautiful, gorgeous trap and just let it take you along. And honestly, I think this guy Richard Hammond. I mean, he is pissed off from minute one.
Yes.
He's like the angriest guy in the world already.
Before he was blind.
Worth his ass. He is. And that's part of, and this is why he's, I'm going to bump into things. I don't care. But this is part of the pleasure of the movie because he does have something of an arc, which I think is effective. I think he's a jerk. And I think by the end of it, there's actually a gesture that humanizes him. It's kind of a spoiler, but it's
we
the very
we do
We allow
spoilers.
spoilers in this courtroom, sir.
Spoilers are all in.
All right. Well, he is willing to try to, despite his, the way he logically feels, he's willing to try to help his wife with a life preserver, and that was the shift in the character. So there.
Well, I do talk about that a little later, but I'm willing to talk about that now. There, towards the climax of the movie, after he is basically being driven around by his would-be assassins, which is his wife and his business partner, who is revealed are trying to basically kill him throughout the movie. He manages to steer the car into a convenient lake, and where David, his partner, hits his head, and his wife, for some reason, can't swim, which I thought was kind of surprising. And she's going to drown, and she's screaming for help. And he manages, and Richard, the blind man, manages to swim to shore. It's lucky he knew what direction to go in, and manages to find a convenient life preserver or a lifesaver, right? One of those life rings. I call it a lifesaver. I think like the candy.
I call them life Fruit Loops.
Very good. Managed to find a life Fruit Loop there hanging on the fence, and I don't know if they have one of those every 100 feet or every quarter mile, but it was very conveniently placed right next to him that he was able to grope blindly with his hands
close to the
and
road,
find it. Sure, but I mean, there's a lot of lake there. I mean, how many preservers are around there? That's what I wonder. Anyway, he throws it to his wife, but being blind, he misses, and she can't reach it, and she drowns. I don't know if that was an intentional choice by him, whether he actually was trying to save her. He's supposed to have a better hearing, having recently been blind. I mean, we see him demonstrate better hearing several times through the films and improved smell. So I would think he would, based on where this wife's voice is coming from, know the general direction of where she is and be able to get that thing a little closer to her if he was interested in saving her life.
Are we to believe that his blindness turned him into Daredevil, sir?
But we see an increased amount of hearing and smell from him. I mean, his directional acuity seems to be better. And so, I mean, he knows where people are speaking and can look at them when they speak several times throughout the film.
Okay, let's hear from the defense. Would you like to rebuttal that last act where he's trying to save his ex-wife or current wife?
Oh, I must really. First of all, he simply swam in the direction from which he had come, and I think he probably had a good sense of that. I don't think the lake was that convenient because I think he was going to just take them all out, the three of them. He was at that point, the heck with it, and go into some trees. So I don't think he intended to go on the lake.
That was my perception as well, sir.
Yeah, and
I agree with that too. So it's convenient there was a lake and that he's able to live.
Well, yeah. I mean, they could have gone into a tree again. That's not where a writer would probably want to take us. I mean, it's more interesting this way, and exciting. And I also think that I could tell from the way Gregson was playing it that he was trying to. You could see the look on his face. You could see the change in him. That yeah, I'm going to throw the life preserver, and that was a big deal. And I think he genuinely tried to get it to her, but it's a big lake, and he threw it. And Rob, I know you probably, after seeing the movie, you probably closed your eyes and threw a life preserver again and again to see just how accurate. Yeah, I know you're that.
See the dramatic recreations, if we may.
Yeah, I know how accurate you are, man. I know that.
Mythbusters, this thing.
So, I think there was nothing that bothered me like that. I have a problem with things I don't buy, but I bought that whole climax.
Now, you said you didn't think a writer would do that. Do you think the writer wouldn't kill all three characters?
No, I think that the three of them at that point going into a tree is just not as interesting as an ending as was presented in the film, and probably in the novel.
Because because after his wife drowns and we see Richard basically stranded there in the lake by the side of the road, not really know where he can go from there, we fade to black and then we hear screeching tires. And to me, I assumed that Richard went into the road and got hit by a car.
We heard, wow, what a dark worldview.
How did you take the screeching tires? Just that a motorist, like...
What about the siren? First, we heard the siren approaching.
Yes, it was like the world's slowest ambulance. It was an unusual siren.
I heard the siren approaching. I don't recall the screeching tires really. No more than any car coming to a halt that was in a hurry, and I assume that somebody nearby had phoned the police. And that was an ambulance or a police.
Lake phone. Okay. So you see it as an ambulance coming to the scene. That's a very fast responding ambulance. I gotta move to France sometime.
Oh yeah.
Because they are very quick there.
We'll let the debate about the ending. Mr. Maynard, your next point, please.
Oh, thank you. I'd like to talk about generally the plot of this film. Is that Richard, after losing his sight, is told to take a vacation in his estate in Cornwall so that he can recuperate after the accident. But we find out through the course of the movie that all is not as it seems because he's not actually in his vacation estate in Cornwall. Instead, his wife and his business partner have secretly taken him to an entirely different estate in the French countryside, which the conspirators have altered to resemble his house in Cornwall. Now, think about how preposterous that premise is. Wouldn't this be almost impossible to do? We're not talking about some track housing in the suburb where every single unit is essentially the same. We're talking about a luxury home, an estate with a nearly identical floor plan to the one he has in Cornwall, enough to fool a man who is supposedly so intimately familiar with it he can navigate it blind by groping around with his hands.
But with the outlet slightly to the left of where it was.
Right. They managed to actually do this successfully, which is almost more mind-boggling, that they managed to find a home so positively identical, except for, a few subtle small differences. There's an extra step on the stoop. There's an outlet in one different place. But otherwise, it's so nearly identical that they managed to fool Richard.
It was in a different forest.
Well, it's in a whole different country, so it's definitely in a different forest.
I'd like to hear from the defense on that, unless you have some more you'd like to bring forward on that.
I mean, just to continue on that, how they did this is not only will they need an estate with an identical floor plan, they're going to probably have to do some significant remodeling to cover up any differences that would have been noticeable. I'm sure the house wasn't exactly identical when they found it, so some renovation is likely. But not only that, they're going to need to take all of the furniture from the house in Cornwall and ship it to the villa in France and place them in essentially the exact same spot that Richard expects them to be. And they actually managed to do that, apparently. And they seemingly only slip up in one moment when Richard's favorite chair is 2 feet to the left from where he expects it to be. But besides that, they're seemingly successful in getting all of these pieces of furniture in exactly the same orientation that they were in the house in Cornwall, because Richard's memory of the house is so great that he's actually suspicious when a chair is 2 feet different or an outlet is a different spot. I mean, this is how meticulous they have to be in their recreation of this house.
And they would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for that tailless cat.
The tailless cat they couldn't control cats. Remember, they moved, Richard's brother, Max, comes to visit, and he plays a piano. So they would have to move that piano too, because pianos are so precise. There's not a lot of pianos that are exactly identical. And since we know Richard is so sensitive to these kinds of things, you'd assume he would notice a piano sounding differently, or he would notice his chair feels differently. So they would have to have shipped all these things themselves.
Okay, let's pass it to the defense. Do you have any point of contention on the house? I feel that this is one of the key points in this trial.
Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever wanted something so badly that you would work for months and months and months at it? And they indicated in the film that they had ample time during his rehab to make this happen.
I do have a shoebox full of love letters to Carrie and Gillen. You did call me out on that. Thank you, sir.
I do remember that. If I can make an objection to that rebuttal, how much time really does pass? Because clearly Richard's vacation is supposed to come right after his rehab. This isn't a matter of years. At most, it's the matter of a couple of months.
Well, it wasn't clear quite how long it took. And when he wakes up after the accident, we don't know how long that took also. But, I once made an exact recreation of the Taj Mahal using nothing but sugar cubes, because
in second grade, I assume.
I can't go into the details, but it was because I had the time and I had the inclination. Now, these people, I think, there are architects who have a distinct style, and you can probably, in certain networks, track down similar mansions, houses, whatever, that have a very similar look to it, and then work on it. This is something that I didn't see it coming when they ended up that hey, we're in France. I didn't. I never saw that coming, and I think it was a great. It might be asking us to buy something that is pretty audacious, but I bought into it. I bought into it because by that point I was so mystified by whether he was going crazy or whether he really is a victim. Are all these people around him against him, or is it just paranoia? And I bought it.
And
okay, let's pass Exhibit A, the Taj Mahal made of sugar cubes, to the jury to admire.
The question is, would the original occupants of the Taj Mahal be fooled by your sugar cube recreation if they were able to walk around inside of it? But now I'll take Mr. Blamire's explanation at face value. Let's say that they did have this either incredible amount of time or significant amount of manpower to do this, to recreate this house. Why did they do it? And the answer to that is to kill Richard, a newly blind man who gropes around with no cane. Now, I might just be a simple country lawyer, but it doesn't strike me that killing a newly blind man who gropes around with no cane would be all that difficult. Not only is he vulnerable in almost any situation, any type of accident that you stage for him would come with its own airtight alibi. You could simply shove him down a flight of stairs and nobody would ever be suspicious of anything. They'd instantly take it as an accident at face value that he blindly stumbled down some stairs. You wouldn't even have to be in the house. You could set up a tripwire at the top of the stairs, go out to dinner in public so everyone sees you, and just wait for old caneless Richard to bumble blindly across the wire and tumble down the stairs. You come home, you remove the wire, no one suspects a thing. It's just a silly man who refused to use a cane, tripping on his own feet, airtight.
That's a very fair point. To the defense.
Now, if Janet Leigh doesn't stop at that motel, there's no movie.
Sure, but at least she has a reason to stop in the motel, right? There's rain.
But if she decides to, I'll just go one more town. I think I think that again there has to be some license, and I think they wanted to have him out of the way for an amount of time where he would be incommunicado. Um, they didn't want him talking to the company, the factory, and they needed him to sign the appropriate papers. And I think they also wanted to make sure that the death was remote enough that they could not check. That it would be hard for people to look into it because he's buried in the south of France somewhere.
That was strange to me too. Why, over the course of the movie, his brother Max ends up dying in circumstances that are sort of explained to us, but we're kind of suspicious. I mean, if Max really does die of his heart condition, that was very conveniently timed. But when Max dies, they bury him there in France. And that was strange to me too, because when you die in another city, don't they traditionally ship your body back to the city that you came from so you can be buried with your loved ones in your family plot? Especially an affluent family like this, they're going to have a family plot. And if they end up burying Max, by the way, in a grave with Richard's name on it to create the illusion that Richard is the one who died. But again, now what do they plan to do with Richard's body when he dies? Are they just going to dump that in the woods? Are they going to bury that? And
obviously, it's a switcheroo.
Are they? I was going to say, are they going to bury it in a grave with Max's name? The film doesn't really go into that, or whether they actually murdered Max or not. And honestly, their murder plan to me is stupid. I think that setting up a tripwire at the top of the stairs is a great way to knock out this blind guy.
Well,
but
Mr.
instead,
Blamire brought up the point they needed him to sign some papers. So, I mean, they could do that after the fact, but they needed to keep him alive for at least a period of time.
Sure, he could have signed those papers at home. We don't need to create an elaborate false house in the middle of France for him to sign some papers.
But it would be easier for him to communicate with the company if he were at home.
As I remember the scene when he is signing the papers, he just trusts them and signs whatever. He's not suspicious at all. In fact, he signs numerous things across the whole thing of the film just because he trusts the people that are around him. So, I mean, true. I think he could have signed those papers when he came out of the hospital, a little tripwire business, but instead they decide to go through an extremely traceable cause of death, which is poison. Which
maybe
is
they're kicking themselves after they hear our trial. Tripwire.
Tripwire would have been brilliant. The movie's over in 5 minutes. So I agree. There's no movie on that to bring up that psycho point, but to jump through such elaborate hoops to get us to stuff that to me sounds cool on paper, but doesn't really hold up to close scrutiny. It didn't make all that much sense to me.
Mr.
Blamire, do you have any rebuttals to that?
Well, the only thing I'll say is that they needed him. They had him incommunicado. If they stayed in the UK and had him sign these papers, and he's in communication with his company, he's going to find out that he just or he's going to get a call from a lawyer saying, "You sure you wanted to sign this over to them?" I mean, I think they needed him out of the way for that. I think an interesting thing to bring up, though, is one thing that is somewhat dangling, although it didn't bother me, but Max, the brother, played by American actor John Ireland there, is obviously in on the deception because they're in France. So obviously he's in on it. So what was he? Was he in on it for a piece of it? It looked at like there might be times there when he wanted to spill the beans to his brother.
I agree with that. Same with Clem and Janet. Clem is his chauffeur and Janet is the housekeeper. They also keep up the charade. Not only that they're supposedly in Cornwall when they're not, but they also keep up the charade as far as how Max dies. So, I know there's a moment where Richard hopes Clem will be in the car so he can tell him, hey, they're going to kill me. And I was like, Clem already knows, man. He knows the whole thing. Which was also weird. Why did Janet and Clem have to be out of the house at the time of the poisoning when they seem like they're they're in on. I mean, unless they think they're harmlessly deceiving him about being in another country. I'm not sure it was. And small point, I don't believe John Ireland is American. I think he's Canadian. I think he was born in Vancouver. And John Ireland, for the record, nominated for an Academy Award for All the King's Men. And that made him the first Vancouver-born actor to receive an Oscar nomination. So fun fact.
Oh, you're taking away fun facts from Mr. Rodriguez. I'll have to hold you in contempt for that.
I'm sure he holds me in enough contempt.
Damn right.
Now, the last point I'd like to bring up, and then I'll pass it on to the defense, and it was very much brought up earlier, is the unlikable nature of all of these characters. Not only are all of his loved ones basically assassins, that they're basically conspiring against him to murder him for money, but Richard himself is not a likable guy. Not from the beginning of the movie. I personally didn't know if I found him all that more likable. I think your point is interesting about him throwing the life preserver to his wife, but after all, he is the one that steered them into the lake and basically causes her to drown. So I don't feel a lot of sympathy for Richard at any point in the movie, even towards the end. And he's not like a dick after the accident specifically. He's a dick before the accident. He ignores his wife when she comes to visit him in the factory. And she's apparently ready to already leave him. So that relationship is already on the rocks. He's rude and demeaning to his business partner, David. And he says at one point, if you'd thought of anything, David, it would be the first time.
And then, by the way, Mr. Maynard, 2 points for Gryffindor.
Thank you. And then a later conversation he has with his brother Max reveals that he had always doubted him, and he's providing him with money, but it's ultimately just to keep him under his thumb. And Max apparently even asked for a job at the factory, and his brother refused, telling him that he'd never worked an honest day in your life. That wasn't as good, but
no, it wasn't.
So anyway, thank you. So none of these characters to me inspired sympathy, and while I don't think films require necessarily a sympathetic character, in this point it's a thriller, and a lot of the tension should be coming from this feeling of relating to the character, wanting to see the character keep going. And I never cared if Richard died. He was a dick. He sort of deserved to die. And I didn't care if his conspirators got away with their plan and got rich, because they were also dicks. So the plot is just a lot of stuff happening, and I don't really care how it winds up ultimately. It took a lot of suspension of disbelief to go along with it. It makes some interesting things happen out of that, but it's just such a preposterous setup to get us there that it took me out of the film just here and there. So, and with that, that is my points for the prosecution, and I will rest.
Well, most movies can be described as a lot of things happening, Mr. Maynard.
And this is one of them. This is one of them, Your Honor.
Mr. Blamire, please, your rebuttal to the likability of the characters.
Yeah, well, I'd like to first address something that Mr. Maynard started with. The thought that, well, why would he want to actually save his wife at the end? Isn't he the one that steered them into the lake? Well, basically, he was about to be killed. He was about to be murdered by these two people, and he had really no other choice. He grabbed the wheel and he turned them off the road. Like, that could have gone off a cliff. That could have gone anywhere, into a tree. We don't know. So indeed, he was going to just take them all out. So, but that's a separate thing from now he's saved, and his wife there is in the lake. She's drowning, and I thought that was fascinating. That he by instinct he let that take over. He let that humanity take over, and he threw the damn life preserver. I think that's important.
It's a discussion point for the audience after leaving the film too.
Yeah, and I didn't like him. I didn't like him either. I completely agree with Mr. Maynard's point that he's an unlikable. He's a horse's ass. He's a jerk, and he's not nice to anybody. I mean, he really is he's just a miserable human being.
Yeah, he's mean.
And yet, I started to get caught up in what's happening to him. And I would find it hard to believe that anyone would resist getting caught up in that because it was so compelling. And a lot of it had to do with the way the shots were framed. There was some nice off-kilter stuff. It wasn't really artsy directing, but there was enough of an off-kilter feeling to put you on edge and to make you think that things were closing in on this guy and that anyone could be an enemy. Is there something going on here? Are there forces against him? And by the third act, which is in a very impressive 20 minutes, I think, that begins with him now at the point where he knows they're gonna kill him, and it could probably be poison. And those were some of my favorite scenes where Mai Zetterling, who I think is terrific, Swedish actress, and Michael Dennison, who was even more, possibly even more unctuous than John Gregson was. He was in a different way, though, and it was in an enjoyable way. Because he wasn't sort of barking like Gregson. He sort of had that lofty attitude about him. But the two of them are hovering there like vultures, waiting for him to take the poison. And then he doesn't, he doesn't want the mayonnaise, and he doesn't want the wine, and and it just went on and on. I just found that absolutely delightful. I really ate that up. I no pun intended.
You really ate the mayonnaise up.
I just loved that part. I also want to give points for and I think Mr. Maynard might scoff at this, but I would like to give points to Mikis Theodorakis' score, in particular the use of the Onze Martineau, which came off as kind of like a theremin almost in this movie. It's a little over the top sometimes because it just blasts out there, but it lent a strangeness to the movie that I really appreciated.
So that was not a theremin. That was what instrument was that?
No, and which is a fascinating instrument, and it was, and I don't know if it's been used in a film before. It might have been used in a film, but it's I think, if I could be wrong on this, maybe a precursor to the theremin, but I'm not absolutely certain on that. It is certainly similar. But I liked that. I liked the ambiance of the film. There was one scene in particular where you hear someone in the room and a light clicks on, and we still don't really know what did the tailless cat turn on the light.
The cat turned on the light, absolutely, yeah.
I mean, or was someone in there messing with him? And he felt the light bulb, and that's how he knew it was on. And that was a pretty neat scene, and things were starting to get a little creepier then.
You'd think he would hear someone in the room with him, though. I mean, he knows when David's in the room with him,
right,
in a later scene. And so I think he would hear someone physically entering a room, and if not their footsteps, then their breathing. So
one word, my friend, socks.
Maybe I'd still think their breathing would be loud enough. But perhaps you're right. I would have thought the clicking of the door would have been a dead giveaway. They were thick, big doors,
But these doors were engineered for their brilliant plan, you see, Mr. Maynard.
You can apply all that logic, but still,
I like to believe the cat turned on the light because it makes me happy.
As do we all. Mr. Blamire, you may continue, please.
Yeah. So with that scene, I mean, we really don't know if there's someone in there, but I also liked the surrealist in me liked some of the strangeness, like the altered outlet, the outlet in the wrong place, the roses are in the wrong place, and I thought, my first thought was that those were the changes that were made, and that was to gaslight this guy. Okay, they're going to drive him nuts and have him, institutionalized and there. But I really was caught up in it. I didn't see where it was going, and if a movie can pull me in like that, I give it points. I give it marks, and especially one that is on an obvious moderate budget. I don't know if this is what in Great Britain they'd call a quota quickie. I don't think it's quite that low, but it's definitely not a big budget movie.
It's a nooner.
But yeah, it's somewhere in there. It really it really, for me, was a successful film that looked forward to more paranoia-inducing movies down the road, and for that, I enjoyed it a lot.
So, Mr. Maynard, do you have a rebuttal to like the thriller aspects of the way this film was shot?
Well, I agree with Mr. Blamire. It would have been interesting if they were trying to actually gaslight him and drive him insane. That would have been almost worth the hoops of jumping through to set up a secondary house, right? To try to slowly drive him crazy by just slightly moving things and then denying it to him. But that isn't what they did. But it would have certainly been more interesting. I also thought it would have been, if we're talking about things that would have been more interesting, I thought it would have been interesting if the Apollo light bulb that exploded had actually been sabotaged by David, maybe in an attempt to kill him, or that would have been very cool, where like that's his first attempt to kill him and it fails, it just renders him blind.
Crank it more, you bastard! Crank it!
Yeah, but ultimately it is just him over cranking that bulb. I don't exactly have, because I agree with first time I watched the movie, it did pull me in with the psychological thriller, and although I didn't like the guy, I was wondering, is he going insane? So I agree with that. But they ultimately weren't trying to drive him insane. They were just trying to kill him. And I still say trip him over the stairs.
Okay. Mr. Blamire, do you have any further points as to the merits of this movie that we didn't go over?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to comment on something Mr. Maynard said, that about the gaslight idea, that angle. If they had kept that up, I'm a great predictor of movies. I'm always looking ahead in my mind and see that's a curse, because I guess a lot of writers will do that. I mean, you're going ahead in your mind. Where would I go if I were writing this? And that's no way to watch a movie. So if I can forget about that and get caught up in it, that's a good thing. And when I started to think, they're gaslighting him, they're changing things around, and it didn't go that way. See, that's the points right there, because it wasn't predictable. For me, the worst quality any movie can have is predictability. I don't care.
Did you know Bruce Willis was dead at the end of The Sixth Sense, out of curiosity?
I was just going to say that. Damn you, Ben.
No, I didn't see that coming. But yeah, I loathe predictability. This was not predictable. South of France, really? No, I didn't see that coming. So there.
Yeah, the court agrees. I did not see the South of France switch thing coming either.
The prosecution agrees. I also didn't see it coming, because if I had, I would have been like, no, that's impossible. But
Mr. Blamire, any further points?
No. I think I rest my case, I believe, as they say in the movies.
And as we say here in this courtroom. All right. Thank you both. The prosecution and defense have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Prosecution, you may begin.
Distinguished members of the jury, Your Honor, I've said all I care to about this film. I'm sure when it was first conceived, the filmmakers thought they had a really bright idea on their hands. But much like the protagonist in this film, that bright idea soon blew up right in their faces. With a premise so flimsy it collapses in on itself, with the complete absence of a single likable character with which we can relate, and with an ending so confusing, so unsatisfying, there's seemingly no rhyme or reason for this film to exist. It has nothing to say, nothing to impart to us. It's just a lot of weird crap happening that probably sounded cool on paper, but doesn't hold up for a second under closer scrutiny. Now, don't let my fast-talking city slicker colleague here fool you. This movie does not make any sense. When you step into that deliberation room today, remember, justice may be blind, but you don't have to be. Vote guilty. Thank you.
And Mr. Blamire, your closing argument, please, sir. Well,
City Slicker, well, that's an interesting thing for you to call me here, Mr. Maynard. You sure get some notions, don't you? Oh, you sure do. I don't know where you get your stuff. Obviously, my distinguished colleague was able to prepare something ahead of time. Of course, I'm afraid I hadn't listened to the show before, so I could have done that too. But I will say this, that that I'm someone who likes to be taken on a trip. Now, when I go into a movie, I want to go in and enjoy the journey, and I will forgive a lot about the destination if that journey is interesting and it holds my attention, keeps my interest, and maybe even has me on the edge of my seat. I will forgive logic. I will forgive what the final wrap up is. And there are movies that have a little bit of a letdown at the end. But again, if the journey was good, then the destination doesn't matter so much to me. And this movie, made on an obvious moderate budget, really took me somewhere. It had a nice air of strangeness, which I appreciate, and I did not ultimately know where it was going to go, and that's a lot of points for me right there. Rest my case.
For not having a statement prepared, you did very well, sir. Thank you both, members of the jury, Mr. Haslar, Mr. Rodriguez, Big Papa Schlender. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It's now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict. It's right there, second door on the left. Don't make me get up.
Let's see. Dylan, why don't you go first?
Sure thing. I gotta say, it was a very interesting movie for sure. I mean, the whole crux behind it is, he's blind and they take advantage of him. So a lot of it is going to be carried on whether the fact the main actor can play blind believably, which I think he does. I think the prosecution bringing up the point of the cane, I was immediately thinking like, well, he's too proud to use a cane. So when the defense rebutted that, saying, he's too proud to do it, I thought that was a good point. But man, I gotta I right out the gate, I agree with the prosecution on some of these major plot holes. I mean, like, I think the writer, the director just bit off way more than they could chew. And they seem to have trouble developing this idea of like, well, we're going to put him in a different house, in a different country, because if we could kill him outside the country. And, this idea that they need him alive to sign things, when the movie deliberately shows quite clearly that his writing has gone to pot, like he can't even write a note to his doctor. So why not just forge his signature? And if they say it looks weird, say, well, he's blind. Stop being insensitive. Money, please.
Rick.
Yeah, right. It's so. I mean, I do kind of like the idea of like if this was the movie that they may have thought they were making originally, where they were just trying to mess with him a little bit, just like change things a little bit. You're going crazy. And that would really explain more why everyone else was in on it. I think the movie was pretty unclear about who was in on the plot and to what end. Was John Ireland in on the plot to kill his brother, or just to make him crazy so he could have a controlling interest in the estate? Were the maid and chauffeur just following orders, or because they were told like, look, he's very, very, very fragile mental state right now. If he goes crazy in London, they're going to commit him. So we're going to Paris here. So I don't necessarily think everyone was in on the whole "we're going to murder him" thing, because they weren't acting like it. But if they were all in on it, then there's a lot of the conspirators are still out there. There's going to have to be an investigation. So yeah, it was just a kind of muddling, confusing mess. Though I will say, in the defense, I did like Mikis Theodorakis' music, but he's like one of the best composers in the world who's still alive. And like, if that was the music he was doing back then, it's like, it doesn't really hold up to his later body work. I could definitely say, like he's a truly exceptional human being, well worth looking into. He's done quite a bit with his life. And anyway, so right now my gut is I'm definitely leaning towards guilty right now for sure. So I'll pass it counterclockwise this time.
Okay, so
how do you know you're counterclockwise to him? I'll get out of the room.
Get out of here, Mr. Prosecutor.
So I had never heard of this movie before we decided to do it. I don't know what about you guys? Had you heard of
No,
it?
this is brand new for me.
Okay.
No, I was not familiar with it at all, and which is funny because I've seen a lot of John Ireland movies too, because he's pretty great. So I had not seen this one or heard of it.
So kind of like digesting it, I thought going in that this might be a horror movie, and it ended up turning out to be kind of more of a psychological thriller. But at least until the end, it's revealed that it's not really a gaslighting kind of thing. I was thinking that I don't know if you guys have seen The Lodge, the recent
Oh
horror
yes,
movie that
it's
came out this
great.
year.
I
I
love it.
felt a lot of the same kind of plot structure elements in there, and
Yeah, no, you're right. I can see that now.
and like it's very atmospheric at times. It has really good cinematography. Like in about halfway through, there's a scene where he's at the dinner table and the wife is trying to give him a glass of wine, and they use forced perspective to make the wine glass like take up maybe 35% of the frame. And I thought, well, that's a cool idea, but then I started thinking, but wait a second, he's blind. Like, so that's only for me, really. The movie is specifically talking to me as a viewer, saying, this is a little weird, this is a little warped, and I got to appreciate any time a movie can do that. And it amused me greatly that John Gregson, when he has sunglasses on, kind of looks like Warren Oates from Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. And I was just like saying his lines in my head and just thinking, well, he's a gruff asshole too. Yeah, this fits. And that was more that I won't lie, that kind of dominated my mind most of the movie. But this is it's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. And ultimately, we are here to determine that a movie is guilty of being a bad movie. So,
But there's so much wrong with it. The way it's constructed, the way it's written, the way it's acted, with the notable exception of John Ireland. I mean, the prosecution brought up some very compelling points for why this movie's like actually
Like the
bad.
layout of the house
True.
is a big one for me.
You can't rewatch this movie. Once you know everything that happened. I mean, at the end in the hospital bed, he explains the whole movie to you just in case you were too busy checking your phone. Remarkable foresight for a movie that came out in the 50s.
but there's a difference between a movie being bad and a movie having structural flaws. There's a difference between a bad movie and a movie where all the details don't add up. Because Hitchcock was mentioned earlier. I could take literally almost any movie he's ever made and take out systematically, piece by piece, everything that doesn't fit, and yet I could still rewatch those movies. I'm not saying that I could rewatch this movie per se, because I haven't really thought about it, but I don't think that structural flaws are necessarily something that have to bring down the overall effect.
So what brings it up then? If you're already admitting to these structural flaws that the prosecution pointed out, which I think are very considerable and very hard to ignore, what saves it? What's the saving grace?
Well, the saving grace is aesthetics. It's atmosphere. It's mood. It's tension. It's feeling. Like at the end, not at the very end, but at the French hospital, it started to like take on the properties of a stress dream that I know that I've had at least several times, and that kind of like panic attack feeling of I am totally fucked in a situation that I do not understand, that I will never understand because people don't know me like I know me. Like that kind of weird dichotomy that kind of breaks your brain. And that is something that I don't think a bad film can do.
My dreams about French nuns are a lot different than yours, clearly. Big Ben, bring some order to the court, my guy. What are you thinking?
Well, the one point I was very sympathetic to was in the defense's closing argument, where it like doesn't really matter like sometimes in a movie how technically bad it might be. It's like how well you're swept away in it. Like I love Star Trek, but it's campy as hell. I don't really notice that because I love it. I love the things that it's saying. That said, I noticed a lot of the things in this film that the prosecution said that just bugged me a lot. Like the layout of the house. Once that was explained to me, it bugged me. Like the more I started thinking about it, like, could they really do that? Is that really possible? There's got to be easier ways to do that. And the other thing is the theremin music. I guess it's not the theremin, but it's the second I hear that music, my mind immediately goes to Mystery Science Theater 3000 because I've just seen so many films there that had the theremin music in it. And my mind was, I'm a little biased in that regard, but my mind immediately is like, oh, this is meant to be, made fun of. It immediately dates the thing just hardcore.
Valid, completely valid. But so, like, breaking down what makes a film good or bad, I think that you could definitely throw script up there. You can throw plot up there, of course, that's natural, but you have to acknowledge that it is a medium that isn't just a script that somebody photographed. It's about construction in terms of being on the set and assembling shots and then assembling and editing. You can make a feeling from that. It's not just, does this story hold up? I'm not making the argument that this is a great movie and that it's a great script. I'm just making the argument that these things do not necessarily make a movie bad.
No, does a forgettable film equal a bad film? I mean, that's a question we haven't answered in this court.
What
was the question?
Yes, actually, yes. I would say if you completely forget a movie, yes, then it's ineffective, and an ineffective movie is bad.
Like a movie, like people say when you're reviewing your favorite movies of the year, and people are like, "What about this one?" And you sort of that movie came out. Oh yeah, I sort of remember seeing that. That's sort of this film to me. Like I remember it because we just watched it, but if you gave me a year, I'm not sure I could remember much about it.
Yeah, it's all sizzle and no steak. I like the crazy music bits, and I did like John Ireland's acting and things, and there was a kernel of a good idea in there, but when you put it all together, it just kind of fell short. I think maybe my favorite part would be, because it kind of encapsulated the things I just said, except for John Ireland, was when he was at the grave and he feels his name and there's the big music sting there. I thought that was interesting and compelling, and that really you take notice, right? You stand up for that. You're like, oh, hey, wow, okay, things are about to happen. But then things don't happen, and then he explains everything that had happened before when he's in the hospital bed. And the whole time they're driving, you're just waiting, because he's going to crash the car. I mean, that becomes clear as day. It's like, why are you letting him sit near the steering wheel? It's they continually underestimated the man. It was a tough one to get through. It was a. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious where I'm coming down on this. Ryan, you sound pretty mind made up. I don't think I'm going to be able to convince you.
No, probably
Big
not.
Ben, where
you're guilty. You're not guilty. It's up to me.
It is
pretty
up
much
to you.
I love it. Yeah, there's just too much forgettable and too much. Does this make sense? It would not be enjoyable on a rewatch, and that is a big part of what makes a film good to me. Because I can just rewatch Star Wars or Star Trek to death. I could not rewatch this as easily. So I'm afraid I'm gonna have to go guilty.
Fair enough.
Okay. Well, we should go tell the judge in about 30 minutes.
Yeah. Let's get some popcorn. Screw that guy. I hate that judge. Do you hear his voice? How grating it is? Oh my god.
I wasn't gonna say anything.
Just the meanest. He's like the guy in the movie. God.
Actually, that was something I thought was pretty cool, was designing a light bulb. I'm like, that part I thought was really.
I like that too. I've never seen people try to up Edison in a movie. Yeah,
and but it didn't mean anything in the end. It could have been a car accident made him blind. Him being blind in the light bulb had nothing really to do with it. So, but that was a little unfortunate.
Well,
all right,
when he doesn't have eyes anymore, he can't see anything. So he's in the dark. So he designed a light bulb. You see?
God, that's pretty tortured.
It's a metaphor.
Why are we still here? Let's go talk to the judge. Judge, get me out of here.
It's a metaphor.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached your verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of the People versus Faces in the Dark, we find the accused guilty of being a bad movie.
Oh, all right. That's good for me. I'm
just
surprised.
Well, the sentence for this film will be light because it is the court's opinion. It's not that bad of a film. It's just barely bad. So I sentence the writers to redo this film, but with a second draft on the script. Court is adjourned.
And what an explosive trial that was. Here we are now. Mr. Blamire, how do you feel about the verdict?
Well, I'm perhaps disappointed, but not really terribly, because I have all my life championed movies that I find something in that is worthwhile, that is not necessarily popular, and so it ultimately that kind of negative feedback on something that I like has never affected my enjoyment of it. And this was, I watched it again, and I had seen it. I first saw this movie about 4 or 5 months ago, I think, and I enjoyed watching it the second time, even though I knew what was going to happen. I liked I enjoyed the storytelling of it. So this verdict doesn't really disappoint me that much, because, like I say, I'm used to championing underdog. I appreciated Ryan's comments specifically about how you can take some Hitchcock apart if you really want to, and look at the logic. But do you really want to? No, we don't want it. So there, it really didn't faze me at all.
All right, well, thank you very much. We will leave Hitchcock alone, and here comes the conquering hero himself, Mr. Maynard.
Hey. This one was bittersweet for me. I was, a court-assigned prosecutor. Larry picked the movie, so I had to prosecute it, and I attacked it where I could, and it was enough to sway everyone. But I do have to agree with, some of the jury's points. I like the aesthetic of the movie. I think it's really, really well directed with its forced perspective. I thought its mood is really great. There are just, a lot of logical holes that I don't think really interrupted my enjoyment of the film. I think I would watch it again, in fact. But my job was to prosecute it, and prosecute it I did.
A remarkable claim. Well, see you next time as we kick it back to the boys in the studio.
All right, that was a great case. Larry, you did a great job.
Sure, I did.
Like I said, I had to prosecute it, and I liked the movie.
Votes all over the place.
Get your own.
If you liked the movie, it wasn't a bad movie.
Oh, I disagree with that, Larry, and I think you should know that. You can like bad movies, and you can hate good movies.
Next, you'll tell me Plan 9 from Outer Space is a bad movie. And then
it's a bad movie, but we like it.
It's not a bad movie.
Well, one of the nice things about this is you can watch this movie for free on YouTube. It's up there, so people
watch
should
it for yourself and make your own mind up, and don't listen to us necessarily.
It's definitely different.
Yeah, it's jaunty. It's only, back in that day, it's only what, 80 minutes, 85?
Yep.
82.
So, Larry, how did you find this movie, though? I mean, this seems pretty random, even for us.
Yeah, it's these days I'll find a lot of movies mentioned on Facebook among certain friends. My friend Tim Lucas of Video Watchdog had posted about this some time ago, and it stuck with me, and I watched it and enjoyed it. And he had read the book too, I believe. He was talking about comparing the book to the movie, and I love discovering stuff like this, because this is obscure. This one is pretty obscure, and yes. I love obscure movies.
Yeah, no, it's interesting how obscure it is, but like you said, we have Mikis Theodorakis in it. We've got John Ireland, and Ryan, you found the set designer guy.
Yes,
you want to explain
Anthony Masters. Anthony Masters, the art director, did sets for 2001, Dune, and Papillon, and those are all amazing. I don't think that Stanley Kubrick was watching this and thinking that's my guy, but
nope. He was watching Warning from Space.
I'll start that alternate narrative just in case.
That would be a good hashtag for us, I think. No, so it is pretty interesting, the pedigree that this movie ended up having.
And that's all we have to say on that.
Dylan just stopped talking. I thought something bad had happened technically.
It's true. I never shut up usually.
Yeah. So, Larry, what have you got going on? What is keeping you busy during these unprecedented times?
I just finished a narration gig with It came up all of a sudden, and it was 25 packed pages of narration for a documentary. So that was a lot of work in my best in a world voice, and and I'm working on the Big Dan Freighter Audio Adventures Volume 2 release. A couple of you are involved with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you'll be hearing from me very sure, probably tomorrow. Actually, I'll be sending an email about that, about the voiceover work. So getting that ready. So that's what I'm doing.
All right, awesome. Yeah, and if I know that the Kickstarter for Big Dan Freighter has ended, but if people are looking for the project, they can still pick it up, right?
Once
it's released.
Once it's completed, it will be available for purchase. Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I'm sure that we'll have further updates as it does get released, and we'll share it all around. Now, we also take suggestions from our guests for movies, and I know you love obscure films, so I'm looking forward to this. What should people watch?
I've got a couple, not obscure, but I really enjoyed one of the movies I most enjoyed recently was The Color Out of Space with Nicolas Cage,
Mm-hmm.
which is an adaptation of Lovecraft, another adaptation of that Lovecraft story, directed by Richard Stanley, a comeback for him. And I thought it was terrific. I really liked it.
I watched that several times in a row when it came out, and I really liked it too. I'm a big fan of the story, so I know I read the story, and but yeah, that's another one where like the aesthetics of it are really lovely. It's quite a color out of space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I also enjoyed recently The Good Liar with Helen Mirren and Ian McKellen, which is a nice, twisty kind of psychological thriller. It's weird to call it a thriller.
That's the one where he's like trying to seduce Helen Mirren, but is he really? Sort of thing?
It's a quiet movie. This is a movie. Don't see or hear or read anything about it before you see it.
I've only seen the trailer. Am I already ruined?
I don't think the trailer was too bad, so you're okay. But check it out. As far as obscure, well, I don't know if Triangle is really obscure. What's it from 2008? The British sci-fi mind-bending movie Triangle. I highly recommend that. That's one of my favorites.
Is that about the Bermuda Triangle or just triangle in general?
No, it's not. Although it is in a boat on the water, but it's not necessarily about the Bermuda Triangle. And that's another movie that it's better not to read anything about it. It's crazy, and it's metaphysical and nuts. So I recommend that.
Yeah, I've seen that one. It's an acute little movie.
Yeah.
What an obtuse joke.
Ben, you got that.
Ben, you were our judge. What do you have for a suggestion?
I was going to have my own little corner of suggestions where whatever film we watched, there's an Asian film that did it better. But Ryan said The Lodge, and I liked The Lodge. It reminded me, he's exactly right. There's a lot of like the same beats in this movie that The Lodge has. And if you're into religious craziness, and I am, you might enjoy it like I did. So check that one out.
Cool.
Dylan, what do you got for us?
Well, we were talking about the great Mikis Theodorakis, and he did the music for Zorba the Greek. But I want to point out an even better Greek composer, Vangelis, who actually did a whole album devoted to El Greco, and who's a famous Greek artist. And they made a movie about El Greco called El Greco in 2007 using Vangelis' score. So that is what I'm recommending, but it's really just a backdoor recommendation for people to listen to the El Greco album and soundtrack, though the movie itself is very well done.
Okay, I understood a couple of those words in there. Ryan, what do you have?
I'm going to recommend a movie that has some similarities to Faces in the Dark. It's called Unsane. It is the first movie that Steven Soderbergh shot entirely on his iPhone. It is a psychological thriller in the gaslighting subgenre. It actually goes to places that I thought that Faces in the Dark would go, and it is a great movie.
That's Unsane?
Unsane, yes. It's on Amazon Prime.
Oh, Cool.
Oh, very cool.
like that.
And for me, since we had Faces in the Dark this week, I'm going to choose and recommend Fiend Without a Face.
Nice.
I thought you were going to say Face Off.
Oh, I should recommend Face Off.
You should.
But, yeah, Fiend Without a Face is I guess you'd say it's a horror movie, but it's a 1958 sci-fi horror movie. Kind of, there's some psychological things. I mean, say again?
Masterpiece.
Yeah, I really like it. And it's enjoyable. And I think in this, it's kind of not what when you're watching it, where it's going is not, I think, where you expect it to end. So I'm recommending Fiend Without a Face, one of my favorites. And I just watched it again last month. So I'll recommend it.
Yep.
And with that, Larry, want to thank you for coming on and joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Hopefully we can have you back sometime in the future, and you can defend something else right into the ground or prosecute something if you want.
All right, but you better like it this time, man.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We'll get you on.
Next time. He's nicer.
Ryan is a somewhat nicer judge. None of us are really all that nice when it comes down to it. And with that, that is all the time we have for this week. We're all out of show, and we hope you join us next time as the Reels of Justice keep turning.
Later.
Bye-bye.
I should have looked up there to say goodbye in Greek.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.